So in the world of oysters, and then of course I've also built restaurants. I had 2 restaurants in the city of Toronto. I had Starfish, which was an oyster bar, ran for 15 years, and then I had the Cayley Cottage, which is an Irish pub that ran for about 10 years, both of which are now closed. And I spend my time, one, teaching at a culinary school in Toronto called Centennial College, and the other part of my life is traveling the world talking about oysters and going to do oyster festivals, running festivals, judging, competing, teaching, and talking about oysters. I'm now creating something called the Oyster Master Guild, which is an online and in-person teaching format to teach people about the level of oysters, to which most people tell me I talk about like a sommelier talks about wine. We have 5 different species of oysters in North America that we can use, and therefore you have to have different flavors from each one of them. Each one of them will be different. The beautiful thing about Ireland, you have 2 of those 5 species. We have our East Coast oyster, Crassostra virginicus. We have a West Coast oyster, which is called a Magellana gigas, and it's the same as your rock oyster here in North America. This is the #1 oyster grown around the world. We also have a Kumamoto oyster coming from Japan, grown in the Washington State region, as well as the Ostera family, the Ostera edulis, European flat, your natives here in Ireland. And they're grown in Damerscott, Maine. They were brought in over in the 40s as an experiment. They grow way too long, comparatively speaking, to the regular oysters, the natives there. So they kind of gave up farming them, but there's a wild set that is continuing to grow there. We celebrate that idea every September when they come back up online. And then we have the sort of distant cousin of the Ostera edulis, but an Ostera lauridis from the West Coast, Washington State. And it's like a small little oyster. It grows 5 years to grow the size of what we call a loonie, the $1 coin, something not small, but most complex in the flavor. And so when we start talking about oysters in flavors and complexity, each species has a base flavor range. So our East Coast oyster is salty sweet. Various types of salt. It can be hot, it can be cool, it can be less salty, or if it's in a brackish water, usually around Chesapeake Bay, which is a huge estuary. Lots of fresh water that comes into it, drops the salinity at the higher point, the lower point of Chesapeake Bay. It's saltier. There's 8 regions of growing in Chesapeake Bay as it is. Will produce different flavored and different finished oysters. Prince Edward Island, tiny little island in one of our national provinces, can fit in Lake Ontario, and it has 10 growing regions as well, North Shore, South Shore, East and West, and they're all different flavors from the same species of oyster. So once we start talking about that, my restaurant Starfish, at one point in time in 2007, I had 20 different oysters. I had them coming from Ireland and France, United States, New Zealand, and Canada, because we can do that. In Canada, we can import from those regions, and that creates a wonderfully huge palette of different oysters. But your customers would go, well, what's the difference between this one and this one? And why do we have oysters from here? Why should I buy a French oyster? They have oysters in Ireland? I'm like, it's an island surrounded by ocean. Yes, there's lots of different oceany things that you can find in Ireland. It's a wonderful growing region as it is. And as you'll find out, oyster is located pretty well everywhere ocean touches land in a global perspective. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere flip their seasons. So our winter is New Zealand's summer, and vice versa. So when we go into summer, we go get our winter oysters from New Zealand. It's a wonderful little contra to see the different flavors coming around. So we talk about the oyster, and sorry that I use me as we. It's me, myself, and I. There's 3 of us talking in this head here. So that's how it gets to be the we. So when we talk about oyster in that sense, then we have to think about it in its flavor ranges. What do people like? Have you had oysters here before? Yes. So you've had, and you're relatively from Ireland-ish, or you've had oysters from here or from away as well? Okay. So when you have the native oyster, which is just celebrated, the Galway Festival, opening time is September. Don't eat oysters in months without an R. Have we heard this one? It's an old fishtail preceding refrigeration and transportation. Yes, and basically on these oysters here, the native oysters to Ireland, the European flats within those months, May, June, July, and August, they're brooding oysters. So that means that the oyster will brood and the female holds on to the young in its gills for about 4 months before it allows it to go out into the world and become their little oysters. So when you consume those oysters during those summer months, which they're edible, but they have sort of like a little grayness to them on the siltiness. And what is that? It's caviar. In the end, it's oyster caviar. When the shell gets a little bit bigger, unlike fish caviar, it gets a little bit crunchy and granular. So later towards August and September, with global warming, it's now slipping into sort of October as the finishing time zone. They will be firm, fat, plump, gorgeous, and seasonally ready. So with the onset of refrigeration and modern transportation in different regions, our oysters in North America, the eastern seaboard and the Pacifics, are broadcast spreaders. Means that the male and the female spawn off into the water, the little zygotes are formed, meiosis, mitosis, the split, they form, they create a little bit of a shell, they float around in the water column until the shell grows heavy enough to make shell, and it drops. It sticks to the ground wherever it falls, and it can move miles away depending on the way the tide takes it, so that's why they can spread out everywhere. But they like to stick to other things, other oysters, sticks, wharfs, everything. So once they stick themselves, they don't ever move again. Clams move. They swim, they dig, they move. Mussels can move. They usually tie themselves with fimbriae. If the fimbriae breaks, they can extend more fimbriae. That's the little threads that you have to pull the beard. It's fimbriae, and they re-stick themselves if they have to. Oysters do not move. But because the native oyster as well becomes a brood oyster, it releases out with shell already. They don't necessarily attach to anything along the way. If they're younger and they do, then they will have attachments, but they don't make massive beds like they do the North American oyster or the Pacific oyster, where you'll have mother beds of big oysters all stuck together. But you're going to see here, and I've got a lovely treat for you today. We have a tasting of oyster from Galway Bay and then from Cork. So technically speaking, it's the same species, it's the native. And this is what's super rare. I call certain oysters rare and wonderful, depending on the region that you're at. Toronto, North America, Irish oysters, rare and wonderful. I was the only person to bring them into Canada for 10 years. And French oysters, the same thing, because most normal consumers consider an oyster as an oyster. I'm going to put sauce on it, I'm going to put lemon on it, and why should I spend $4 on an oyster when I can get it for $1.50? Well, it's different. Do you want Chateau Neuf de Pape or do you want Chateau 2x4? Your wine selections. There's New World wine, Old World wine. There's an instant similarity. So we tend to parallel the wine world, and that's why we use this word sommelier. Oyster sommelier is someone that understands the knowledge of all the oysters in the region and can eventually, hopefully, organize and run an oyster program or oyster bar for a restaurant. Oyster shuckers should know the same amount of information, but generally speaking, tend to only work in one region and don't understand beyond their region. If I grew up in New York, I would use a Blue Point oyster and pretty well nothing else. Why would I can get it right from here. If I'm from the West Coast, I would use West Coast oyster. I'm from Toronto. It's Lake Ontario. There's no shellfish around. And so we got very good at importing. And that's how I got very good at understanding how to get oysters, how well they ship, which ones ship better than other ones. These ones are very good, but they're not as good as our East Coast oysters. Our East Coast oysters last 4 weeks out of water. These will last about a week and a half. Now, they will lose liquor, they'll get a little dry, but the East Coast oysters can hibernate because they deal with ice. In the wintertime, we do winter pretty well, not like the Scandinavians, but we've learned we can do very good winter, and our oysters go under the ice in the wintertime and they learn to hibernate. So when they get into a fridge, they think it's the wintertime, and that's how they can last that long. So what we're going to do, and this is why as well, the idea with this class was the reason why shucking matters, and how to experience an oyster rather than just eat it. How many people have heard or was told at the beginning of their journey in oysters to swallow or chew?
I was told to swallow.
Swallow.
You don't taste it if you swallow.
Right. Swallow. Chew. Okay. Chew. Where did you learn? Who taught you? Who told you this?
Probably some fancy place in London.
Oh, fancy place in London. Oh,
But then I
okay.
learned to chew them because then you can.
Well, usually it's like Uncle Joe at a family party. He doesn't like it. And how did you?
An oyster crazy chef.
Oyster Crazy Chef, I probably know them. So yeah, there's times, especially in the States, you see a lot of this as well. Cocktail sauce, Tabasco. Where's Tabasco from? Louisiana, right, Micklehenny Island. Louisiana oysters tend to be a little lighter in flavor. They're just ocean, sea salt and sweetness clean. That's about it. Those ones in Louisiana tend to be brackish water, so they're even less in the salinity. So with less flavor, sometimes they need a little something. And also as a marketing idea, much like Guinness and oysters, it was stemmed off in a marketing idea that just sort of swirled around. Therefore, you see Tabasco here. Is Tabasco peppers known as a flavor that is Irish or European or Scandinavian? Or the French tables, they'll all have Tabasco because historically in the 1800s, Tabasco and oysters became this thing that looks really nice, the red, the green, it's lovely. But it becomes a flavor that is inherent. Some people, you have to put sauce on it. So when they learn in the States, you smother it with ketchup and horseradish. Ketchup is a sweet, horseradish can be a pickled in a spice, or Tabasco. You hold your nose, you knock it back, swallow. And when I like, really? Fat. Oh, do you do that with your steak or maybe a salad? Well, no, you chew that. Well, why would you do that with this food? It's a food. And I know it can slide back. People think there's a viscosity. There's an oiliness or a sliminess to the oyster, but it's not. It's wet. It's meaty. It's got lovely little flavors of ocean through it as well, which is the interesting part. So once you try to get the people to understand that type of stuff, and you try to get them to try their first oyster, it's an interesting thing, but I always advise chew your food. 2-bite chew with oyster. Slide it in. When you experience an oyster, as we're going to do today, we're going to take the oyster. You can smell it from here. Now, here's another one where I don't smell every oyster. Have you gone to oyster bars and you watch people smell oysters when they shuck them? It's really more of a North American thing because the East Coast oysters go through the winter. When they hibernate, if they're under ice, it'll go into a hypoxic situation where there's lower oxygen, and sometimes they can starve off the oxygen, die off in the shell, and then they become very smelly. And it's sort of a thing that they pop open in the spring, so you have to smell the oyster to make sure it's safe. Well, that was good to smell every oyster back in the 1990s, if anyone remembers that era, when you could smoke in restaurants. In a room like this, it would be absolutely blue with smoke. I couldn't smell anything in front of me unless I brought the oyster right up to my nose. We don't smoke in restaurants anymore, so I can tell an off oyster from about my distance, which is only 18 inches away. I can tell from visual and smelling it from there. I'll advise my shuckers, if some chef tells you to smell every oyster, you will smell the top shell. Because this was on top of the oyster. If you pop it, take this off, go. It should smell just of the ocean. Super clean, or what you're expecting in the world of an oyster, what it's going to smell like. So when you're experiencing that, therefore, as well, you take the oyster, you bring it up to your, slide it in, 2-bite chew. You want to have the oyster intact. So as a shucker, I want to leave the oyster as if this oyster has opened itself. It's just slipped out of bed, and here it is. You know, and it's this thing. I do not like to flip it. At Galway, I get docked penalty points for flipping the oyster. Anyone can flip. A very good shucker can open it well without any mar, with any cuts, without any grit, and severed from the bottom, just stuck in the back shell. It should have just a little bit of pressure in the back hinge to allow for this proof of freshness. The Parisians still want it attached to the bottom shell. You go to Paris and France, you will get oysters attached to the bottom shell. That's what their little oyster forks are for, to sever it off and then use it. That's how you would do this. Back before, when they had oyster plates in the 1800s and tinning oysters, restaurateurs would take an oyster out of the tin, put it on a plate, voila, fresh oyster, because it's all done in the kitchen. But it really tasted of this heavy tin and metal, and it wasn't very good. Didn't look nice either. So when the consumers started asking, I want it in the shell, they're like, fine. They get a shell, spit polish, put it in the shell, and away you go. And they go, no, it still tastes not the same, because they don't see where the person is producing the oysters. Some of you were lucky enough to see me shuck oysters, so these, you know these fresh. But, so to leave them attached to the bottom shell is the ultimate way to showcase the proof of freshness, fresh bench shucked oysters. We in North America tend to shuck out front on the bar. In France, they have the écalier, which is actually at the side of something like Black Coupole. They actually have a whole station. You can see what they're doing with all of the seafood, and the écalier works underneath the poissonnier in the brigade. You know, you got super chef and super duper chef, and then down here you have poissonnier, that's fish, And underneath poissonnier, and then you get plongé, which is the dishwasher. And that's how you elevate yourself. You can come out of the dish pit, you can go to shuck oysters, and then elevate to épillé, which is 40 or 50 different ingredients, all of the sauces you need for a seafood tower. So you get to be that specific. Now, I've done that type of stuff with my restaurants and do seafood towers, but I focus mostly on oyster. So when we come to a region, the way we think about oysters with the species, we come up with this word called merroir. Like wine in terroir, the influence of the land will affect the flavor of the vegetable or the grape or the wine. And it comes in three parts. It's species, region, farmer. Okay? I have a visual. It's right here. If anyone here knows how to work the slidey deck thing, we can get to that. But if not, then I have these things afterwards as well. Sorry. So I have this here, which is a tasting wheel. And with the tasting wheel comes a merroir map. The idea and the concept, we parallel the wine world. So with the merroir, with species, we have 5 different species. I've sort of given you a brief overview of what they are looking like. Then you have the region, where that species come from. And then you have the farmer. What has the farmer done? And it's energy. It's what the work he's put into. The sunlight creates algae in the region. The estuary, wet fresh water is coming into that region as well to sweeten the salt water and give up that algae bloom to give that flavor, the merroir, which you're going to experience. When you shuck the oyster properly and it's full and firm, and there's almost a bite and a crunch to it, one, you're going to get a very textural experience from the adductor muscle, and that's where the sweetness lies. It is like a scallop. You all know what scallops are. Little white thing. Yeah, that's a muscle. You don't know it? Okay. Yeah, the kitchen guys that are right there going, yeah, no, I don't know that. So a scallop is a muscle that holds the 2 shells, and that's where scallops actually swim. All bivalves have muscles to hold their 2 shells together. And the hinge has got an elastic property wants to stay open. So if you ever seen an oyster on the beach and it's open like that, it's because the starfish or crab has eaten the meat out, and the elastic property in the hinge is doing what it does, and it sits there and dries out. It's so that the oyster does not have to expend energy. When the tide comes in, it opens up and relaxes. The muscle relaxes and opens up. So what we have to do is break the hinge, cut the muscle, take the top shell off, sever the muscle from the bottom and present it. You want to make sure that is all intact. If you break the meat anywhere, if you cut it, we get docked points at the contest. But what happens is you lose this firmness of the flesh and meat of the oyster. You've got to cut into it now. Sort of like a balloon loses a little bit of its air. If this has got a smoke, it's a big hole, deflates completely. If the shucker moulinexes the whole thing, and it looks like sometimes people don't know what a good looking oyster is. And it's been times where I've had clients at my bar back in the early 2000s would come back and goes, dude, you know what you do with your oysters? Oh my God, with this, and it's like, I go, what you do? He goes, well, where have you been? Well, I went to New York, I went to Paris, I went to London, and I had oysters, but they were like chopped up in the shell and stuff, but yours are like perfect. I go, oh, thank you. 1, don't cheat on me ever again. 2, we can have the oysters here, but yeah, it's the technique of the shucker. And who the shucker is in the kitchen brigade quite often matters a lot. Most chefs, if you ask them who their shuckers are generally, it's the dishwasher. So it's the entry-level cook who hasn't got a lot of experience because they worry about cutting their pretty little hands because they have to do the flippy and the cutty and the choppy and presenting their plates, so they don't want to necessarily worry about the oysters. A dedicated oyster shucker or an épillé will kind of think of this and hopefully produce a plate that is desirable, what you'd like to see. So that being said, that's where I like to teach people is to work on their knife skills, working around the anatomy of the oyster. All oysters come pretty well the same. We're going to use this as an example. This is why they call them flat oysters. Your other one, the rock oyster, is very deep cut with a flat top. This one's got a very flat and sort of a flatter bottom. The hinge is back here. It's the pointier part of the oyster. And then the adductor muscle is on the right-hand side of the midline, 2/3 of the way up from the hinge. On all of them. Doesn't matter the species. Doesn't matter the size of the oyster. So if you know that, that's where this muscle is. Now looking at these ones versus these ones, the muscle is almost double the size on this one. So that's why this one tends to be harder to open than this one. Same species. But their growing practice, whatever's happening down in court, is growing huge adductor muscle. You're going to find a wonderful experience of big sweetness from that. and a great textural explosion, so a meatiness beyond the actual soft body meat of the body of the oyster. You should have almost, in my mind, a crispiness on an oyster, like a water chestnut, where it's got that firm bite first and then sort of soft meatiness underneath. And then the chewy sweetness comes from the adductor muscles, the elemental parts. On bigger oysters, I can dissect it and showcase it in a different way. You pull out the adductor muscle, you slice it into little slices, you take the mantle off, that's where the saltiness is. The umami, that ultra seaweedy, earthy, mushroomy notes that comes from the actual digestive area down in the back of the oyster here. Because what does the oyster eat? Seaweed, phytoplankton, in the plankton realm. And they fill themselves up with this, that turns it into glycogen and fat store. That's the butteriness that you're getting from the food that they're eating. And so you've got this wonderful combination of algae, seaweed, ocean seawater, and then this meatiness. And that all creates this umami. On this oyster, you're going to get the most complex. The complexity of these oysters is what most speaks to me of ocean. So when I'm introducing this oyster to people in North America, they don't experience it quite as often as you do. I ask them first, like, have you been to the beach before? Ocean Beach, not Toronto Beach. Oh, Toronto Beach is different. Ocean Beach, yes. And you get that ocean sea spray in that air. You're going to find it within the shell. Because that oyster hermetically seals. That's sealed right there. If I squish it, there you go, 1, 2. If you squish it and you want to quality check chefs, you want to quality check if you do this, and you can quickly look at the drip as it comes through. It's all it's going to give up. One more. You can see whether it's cloudy. If you put it against a white, and you have better glasses than this, you can see if there's a little cloudiness, suspect. Then you go, it smells perfect, so there's no smell to it. When you're buying oysters, you'll get a basket, right? These are the best things to use to package for the growers in the place. These boxes, they hold moisture and humidity, seaweed bottom, seaweed top. It's a value add, so again, if you're a grower, I as a buyer, chef, I want seaweed. I don't want to buy it from someone else. I want to just take it off the top, which we've done here, and use it in your display. But if you stick your head in there, it's just clean. That's all you're going to want to smell. So when you're buying oysters at the grocery store even, you see that they're all closed. You want to knock them together. That one was a little bit on the open side because it's got a little gape right there. If they sound a little bit more solid, you can hear the differences of them. So you can look at them if you're doing that. But normally as a buyer for restaurants, you just buy them by the box. You know the grower, you know who's bringing it to them, you bring them into yourself. So when you're going to experience the oyster, you bring it up, you can smell the ocean on it right away, slide it in, 2-bite chew, and aerate. Like a sommelier tells you about the wine, in through the mouth, retronasal through the nose. When you retronasal, you're really using the full olfactory system. And then you're going to get the umami. You're going to see saltiness up front easily. You're going to start chewing it, you're going to get that sweetness. You're going to get a little bit of seaweed, but as you breathe in and breathe out, you're going to think about the flavors you're going to experience. You're going to see earth, you're going to see mushroom, driftwood, whetstone. On these ones specifically, you get this dry, tannic finish to native oysters. The way I talk about it, there's ways that I've listened to. Tastes like you're licking a penny. So when you put that on your menu, chef, what do you think? Tastes like licking penny. Oh, I'll have 2 of those, please. Yeah, that sounds delish. So I try to elevate and change the words for the chefs to use. I said, well, it has a dry tannic, it ventures off to a whetstone and a dry tannic finish, somewhat reminiscent of light coppers or brasses. It's a wonderful little finish on that oyster, and it's got great length to the finish as well. Very oceany. So you kind of train, you still tell them it's got that little flavor range. Some people are like right up and all over it. Some people have to learn about it, type of thing. So what you're going to see here, and we're going to do this, and so, seeing as I don't have my slideshow, sorry. We're going to have 2 different takes. First off, any good questions? Any lousy questions? I'm good with it either or. That's fine, we'll carry on. What I want you to think about as well, what do you do with the shells afterwards? And you're going to see 2 things. This is super exciting. Rossmore Oysters just won an award with Euro to Ireland for sustainability. Oysters are one of these foods that are what's known as super sustainable. They actually have better value to install into an estuary if there was never one there before, because it'll only benefit that area. Very low energy input to actually produce protein. There was a comparison in 2019 between beef, pork, chicken, fish, and oyster. Based on energy inputs to create an ounce of protein, oyster won out over all of them, by far. Because it's high in protein, low in fat, highest amount of zinc in any natural food source. What does zinc do? Thank you. Helps boost the immunity, and it helps also to release testosterone in the body. For those who believe in aphrodisiacness, because that is a belief system versus a scientific one. Scientifically, it helps release testosterone in the body, boosts the libido, and theoretically, though, as well, if you're more immune and healthier, you get to reproduce more in the world of history. So the healthier survive, and those who ate oysters first tended to be the ones that came out, the hominids that came out of the forest into the ocean and estuary, watched other creatures eating this. And there's a paper or two about the brain development of early humanoids, about how, because of the omega-3s and eating shellfish and fish easily caught on the shoreline, and how we evolved from that system. What you're going to see here, these ones won what's called a regenerative agriculture, aquaculture farming system. These ones here, the Kellys, are a true wild oyster. They just propagate on their own, and they're wild. These ones over here are the Rossmore oysters. You can tell the difference from the size of the shell. They're a little bit bigger. These ones are fully farmed. So you take a broodstock oyster. They have brooding ponds, 15 of them, and they're about 20 by 20 and about 20 deep. And they fill with seawater and a little bit of fresh water, and then they bloom with algae. When it's time for the oysters, and they pick out some of the best oysters, I picked one here. This is what I would call a broodstock oyster. These ones right here, because they're of an older variety. That hinge is massively huge. It's got a delicious shape and shell to it. I would want to produce more oysters with this one. Out of the 150 oysters I've seen, I'm like, this one and this one would be great broodstock. So you take these oysters, put them into the water, bring them up to temperature. This way it has to be in a pond or a pool. If it's in open water, it tends to be too cool until it's summertime. So the ponds will allow it to come up a little faster. And you'll see on the Rossmore oysters that they use, what's this on the back of this oyster? Can you see what that is? It's a mussel shell. So they will use a mussel shell for the oysters to set on. So once the baby little oysters produce and spawn out, and the brooding has happened and they release, they will set and stick to mussel shell more so than either oyster shell or other things. And mussel shell is way more readily available than any other shell as well. But they stick nicely. This becomes a signature for this oyster, because when you see them, you'll see mussel shell here, and when you see the top of it, you'll see the actual imprint of the mussel on the top. Oysters do this crazy little thing. If it grows on a rock or a stick, you'll see the top of it, of the thing, not a mirror, but the top of it on the top shell. It does not affect the meat. It affects the top shell only. So if you see a lot of oysters with a waffle print on the bottom of it, they're grown in little Vexar bags, and they got little squares or whatnot. It's grown into the shell. Often you'll start seeing that waffle print on the top of it. This is where I get geeky, and I'm in the weeds on a Friday night going, look at this shell! And then everything stops, and service is like, Patrick, stop talking, oh my God. And I have to, that's why we have two shuckers in my restaurant. Because I'm the backup shucker. When it gets busy, I'll back up shuck, and then I go, oh yeah. So I get so excited when I see these oysters. Now, when we're using oysters, what do you do with the shells afterwards? Some places will have recycling or upcycling programs. You as a restaurant, I highly recommend keeping the bottom shells for a ramekin. All the chefs know what a ramekin is. It's a lovely thing you put sauce into, and the servers throw it out instantly. They're not supposed to. Nor do they throw out all the spoons and forks, but it happens. So I save the shells and use them as ramekins for sauces or whatever. Use them forever until they go. But I did something fun the other day as well. On the outside of all these lovely things, especially the green ones, you can see the algae that they're feeding on. So green oysters are gorgeous. We love green oysters, because if you know that the flavor is going to be pronounced, it's going to be absolutely gorgeous in this. This is poaching. For those who know, this is a local Irish Galwegian precursor to whiskey. So you start with this, then you add it into a barrel, it becomes a whiskey, right? Different processes. So poaching is an original sort of spirit. It's a white, clear spirit. This is poaching after 48 hours of soaking in oyster shell. So what it does is it takes the chlorophyll, the algae on the outside, it infuses it. And now you have something that's poaching, but also tastes of the ocean. So now you have a cocktail, a bitter, ocean-infused bitter that you can use for your cocktail program. Vesper Martini. I love Vespers because I can't choose between vodka and gin. And then you season it with two things. One, you can do this. Two, when you're shucking oysters, you saw the oyster liquor, this is why I shuck in the tray here, because you'll get this. Oyster liquor is valuable, salty, briny source of flavor. You can use it to do a lot of things, season anything you want to, and or right into your cocktail program as well. So that's what I like to do with that. And the third thing that I'm going to show you is I'm going to do this afterwards as well. You're going to come down and taste these oysters, so do what I say, not what I do. Do what I say. Slide in, chew up, 2-bite chew, aerate. And think about the flavor that you're experiencing. Okay? And then you can try both of them, because we have enough, I think, for all of you. I might have to shuck a few more. But we've got the Rossbar over here. We've got the Galway Bay oyster over there. So that's the Celtic Sea out of Cork. That's the wild Atlantic way. Okay? So it's the same species. So you're going to get all that flavor in there. The ocean sea salt is going to be the one thing that changes. The minerality is going to be a little bit different from Celtic Sea versus the Atlantic. Okay? And so for those who want to, you can come and do this. The last thing that I'm going to do when I'm at Cayley Cottage, and this is what this whole thing is about, is a sense of place. This nails it to Ireland. So when people in Toronto, I said, what's this? I go, this is the taste of Ireland. No sauce, no lemon, no nothing. You just want to have it like this. And you can close your eyes when you have one of these oysters. If you've been to Shannon, you come off the plane, even on a good day with the diesel and the airplane, you can still smell the ocean coming. Who's been to Doolin? Yeah. You walk the shoreline? Not just in the pubs. The pubs are nice, the music's great. Down the end of the road, you walk on the shoreline. It's that turquoise blue and that wet stone. It's in here. It's the Cliffs of Moher when the wind is coming up. It's in here. This travels to Toronto, and the local expats taste this. They get a tear. It tastes like home. The other thing that I did, that is a sense of place, is the smell. So y'all would know what turf is and the scent of peat. So I express this into the whiskey world. When I go and do spirit festivals with this, I will take my oysters and I will smoke it over peat. So I brought peat in. Not just peat, but the turf and peat in, and I would use it as an incense behind the bar, and then I would smoke my fish, and occasionally I got into the oysters as well. So I do a fresh smoked half-shell oyster, still as if you're eating this, but it's been kissed with the turf. And that is something that brings the merroir and the terroir together. Because I think there's nothing like a turf fire that talks about the west of Ireland. And that, unfortunately, well, fortunately, you have to drive here with the windows open to understand what that is. And I've been fortunate through my life to be able to do that a number of times, starting in the 1970s, when my parents thought it was a good idea to bring me over in summertime and go on a trip and a tour. So it was lots of fun from then on to now, and experiencing that. So that's what I like to do. And if you want, I don't know if I don't even know what time. It's
45.
45, are we good? Are we supposed to all leave now? I don't know.
I'm enjoying it.
Well, yeah, I can keep talking. Like I do 3-hour lecture, I do 2-hour lectures, 3-hour lectures, and God forbid they gave me a graduate class which was 6 days long, 8 hours a day. I can't talk for 8 hours. Luckily it was all night and everyone just went beep bop boop and their camera went off and they're asleep, but I'm still blathering on. Poor old Zoom's got this, what is this? Guy's talking for 8 hours straight. I broke for lunch. But what we're going to do is you're going to come up and grab a little oyster. I don't even have a napkin or anything, but you'll see the differences. You can see the difference between the two. So I'll lay this one up like this. This is the Rossbar oyster over there. You'll be able to see the lovely shells that they're stuck to. And I'm going to smoke the oyster, then I'll show you how to shuck.